Hello, this is Mr. Delabruere, and today I will be practicing Essential Elements Exercise 151, The Streets of Laredo, and I'll be playing trumpet. Enjoy. Okay, let's get into some of the details for reading, practicing, and performing 151. One thing I want to point out in the book, they do ask you to write in all of your note names. You're welcome to do that for practice and to make sure that you've got it, but it's not necessary to play. And in fact, at this point, I would definitely recommend that if anyone is writing in their note names to help them remember, you should definitely push yourself to stop doing that as soon as you can. It's going to be important to be able to get your eyes up off of your written notes and to look at the note heads themselves. That's an important step. So I'm just letting you know you're welcome to do that for practice, but in general, please push yourself to not write in your note names. The only exception to that is if you're making a mistake and you want to prevent a single mistake on one or maybe two notes. That's a totally different thing. Writing in all of your notes, I would not recommend doing that other than for practice on this exercise. So let's start with the key signature. The key signature is going to save you from making a bunch of wrong notes and save me from having to listen to them. So I would appreciate you checking out the key signature right now. Note that we do have 3 flats for flute, 2 flats for French horn, 1 flat for clarinet, tenor sax, and euphonium, and no flats for alto sax. So the note that people get wrong the most often in this is actually the 3rd note of the piece, which is also the same note that people get wrong in beat 1 of measure 2. So look at those 2 spots. Those are the notes that people get wrong. So please check those out. Bunch of flats, and alto sax you have an F natural. All right. So all B's, all A's, and all E's for people who have that note right there. Gotta be flat. F, and alto sax, you get F natural. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to get into, there shouldn't be any new notes in this exercise for anyone. However, the rhythm does tend to throw people for a loop somewhat. So let's take a look at the key signature right now. We have 3 beats in every measure, and we do have a pickup note. If we have 1 beat of a pickup note, and there are 3 beats in a measure, then the first note falls on what beat? It falls on beat 3. So we are going to start our counting with the number 3. And we've also got in this exercise a lot of dotted rhythms, which I'm going to talk about specifically. So when you're trying to play along with the accompaniment track gives you 5 beats of a count off. So you might be wondering where the 5 beats come from. If you'd like to count to 5, you're more than welcome, but I think you're going to be confused. So I'd recommend thinking about where the 5 comes from. So the 5 comes from 3 beats of an entire measure that they're giving you just to get set, and then 2 beats, which are the first 2 beats of the pickup measure. So it sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you're playing, but it's actually 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then you play. So if you're listening to the click, it is 5 clicks to help you count off, and that is why. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and then you play on beat 3. Just a quick aside on that. Last thing I'll say, I definitely breathe on beat 2. So it should be 1, 2, 3, 1, breathe, play 1, and that will get you all set up for counting your pickup. All right, I'm going to move on to these dotted rhythms. Let's talk about rhythm dots really quick. When you see a dot next to the note head, it is a rhythm dot, and it does actually lengthen the note by a very specific amount. It makes the note 150% of its original value. Another way of saying that is it takes the original note length and it multiplies it by 1.5. So for example, if you have a quarter note, which is usually 1 beat, and you add a dot to it, you're multiplying it by 1.5, and it is 1.5 beats long. So that's the easy version, and dotted quarter notes are the only dotted rhythms we have in this exercise. Counting them can be a little bit tricky because we end up with notes, we end up with ands out by themselves, and we end up with some beats that are covered over by longish notes. So we're going to need to focus on those when we count the rhythm. So let's take a look at just measure 1, and we'll include the pickup as well. So if we're going to start at the beginning, we have 1, 2, 3, 1, breathe, 3, 1, and 3. So I included the entire 5 count click off. And one more time, let's do it without a 5 beat click off. It's just going to be 3, 1, and 3. So if we go super slow motion on just the first measure with a pickup, you can tell that I am clicking my fingers on the beat, and beat 2 is covered by the first note. Well, the first note of the measure. So it's 3, 1, and 3. So I clicked beat 2, but I didn't say beat 2. Beat 2 is actually hiding inside the dotted quarter note on beat 1. So once you understand that, and you know what's happening, and you're tapping your toe to keep the beat, then you can get used to how it feels, and you'll be able to read them no problem. So one more time, the beginning of this rhythm is 3, 1, and 3. And now I'm going to continue and count all the way to measure 4, which is where we have our next slightly unusual rhythm. So from the beginning, it's 3, 1, and 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, and 3, 1. Let's take a look at just measure 4 specifically. Measure 4 is 1 and 3, 1 with a click, 1 and 3. So in this case, it's very similar to the rhythm that we have in measure 1, except that the dotted quarter note and the 8th note are reversed. So instead of having 1 and, we have 1 and. That's definitely, it looks somewhat similar, but it ends up sounding quite different and feeling quite different. In this case, we have the and kind of feels like it sneaks up on the first beat. So we have 1 and then we continue all the way through beat 2. So that's the difference between measure 1 and measure 4. I would strongly recommend to everyone counting measure 1 and measure 4, and even taking a pencil and writing in your counts, which can just help you remember where those are. Another thing you can do is take a pencil, and besides just writing in the counting, you can also put tick marks above your notes just to show exactly where the beats themselves are. So put a tick for beat 1, a tick for beat 2, which should be invisible, and that will really help there, and then a tick for beat 3. And then you'll know to tap your foot on all of the beats, and the beats are all represented by tick marks. So that would be my recommendation for understanding the dotted rhythms and where the beats are. The biggest challenge with these dotted rhythms is knowing that the beat is still there and that it's just being covered over by the rhythm. But if you can keep track of the beats that you're not playing, you'll be able to play much more in time. It'll help you with that rhythm. Okay. The next thing I'm going to move on to is one slight alteration to the rhythm, and that's at the very end. The last 2 notes are tied together. That's just to make the last note 4 beats long. Since we can't fit a whole note into a measure of 3/4, we need to use a tie to make it go into beat 1 of the last measure. And that's going to account for that rhythm, and that's what the tie is for. So the last note, if you're going to count it very accurately, it should be 1, and then you can hold all the way to that rest at the very, very end. So it should be 1, rest. In my head, when I'm counting, is 1, 2, 3, 1, rest. So that's going to make sure that you get a very accurate note at the very end, and your release is perfectly timed. The next big thing, which you probably have noticed, is the first and second ending with the repeat. The first and second ending allows us to play the middle section twice in a row, but we want to end with a different ending so that it sounds right instead of just stopping right at the repeat. So one thing to make sure that you're watching out for is when you take a first and second ending and you take the repeat, you are not going to repeat the pickup note. So I've had a few people repeat the pickup note and it sounds kind of like this. And in that case, you've actually added a separate note that doesn't belong there. So that's something to really watch out for is if you look at the forward repeat bar and you look at the backward repeat bar, it's everything in between those repeats. Those are repeat signs. So we are not including the pickup in the repeat. The pickup only happens once and that's it. In this case, it sounds the same. So it sounds like we have the pickup, but that extra pickup-y note is actually written into the last measure before the repeat sign. So don't take the repeat. You don't need to. The composers already took care of that and wrote it straight into where you need it. The last thing that I want to talk about with this, and I'll try and be quick, are the breath marks. The breath marks are very important to making this piece sound comfortable and making sure that you have enough air to have a well-supported technique. So I would recommend for sure following all of the breath marks in this piece, especially because the breath marks show you a really good sense of phrasing. For example, if I were to play it and I took my breaths in random spots, it would sound pretty random and it wouldn't sound as clean. I'll show you what I mean by that. So if I take breaths in random places, it just doesn't really make much sense. So taking breaths exactly on the breath marks helps you show where the phrases are in the music. It makes it sound more natural and it makes it sound a lot more mature as a player. So focusing on these breath marks is going to definitely help. If you need to take extra breath marks, just try to find places to sneak them in that sound sort of normal to you. So for example, if it feels to you like you're interrupting the music, then it might sound that way to the listener as well. So we want to make sure that we're breathing in places that feel comfortable. Usually after long notes is usually a decent place to breathe, but that's not always true. In this exercise, that's a pretty decent way to go about it. But like I said, following the breath marks as close as you can is going to be very helpful. And one way to sort of demonstrate how phrasing works is if you take the phrases and you actually separate them out from each other. And in this case, I would not recommend performing this way because it's not correct, but you can demonstrate to yourself in practice how well the phrases are structured if you actually pause every time you take a breath. So I'm going to take a massive pause in between all the phrases just to show how clearly the phrases feel like they end. If it feels like a comfortable ending to the music, or at least a temporary ending, then we know that it's the end of a phrase, and I'll show you what I mean. So that was all one phrase. That's the second phrase. There's the first phrase again. And of course, that's the last phrase. So you can tell if I put very awkward, very incorrect, very long pauses in between each one of these phrases, then you can tell that the breath marks are actually showing you the divide between phrases and that we should structure our breathing to match that. That concludes my practice video for exercise 151, The Streets of Laredo. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And until next time, as always, Happy practicing.